Hello, and welcome to a new series of videos about the legendary black rights activist, educator, and leader, Booker T. Washington. In this series of videos, we will be given 5 to 10 tidbits and interesting facts found in each chapter of Booker T. Washington's autobiography, Up From Slavery, along with some videos about what he accomplished in the mix. Let's get started. Chapter 1. A Slave Among Slaves. Born in Franklin County, Virginia, this chapter details his early childhood as a slave and the conditions he lived in until Emancipation Proclamation, which at this time his family was uprooted from his native plantation to West Virginia, where his stepfather was currently employed. The chapter itself focuses on the hardships and lifestyle Booker and his family had to endure while enslaved as farmhands at this plantation. Here are 5 interesting facts found about Booker T. Washington in his time as a slave. 1. He doesn't know his birthday or even his birth month. While it is known that he was born in Franklin County, Virginia, Booker nor his family is actually aware of the exact day or month of when he was born. Quoting from his autobiography, "I was born a slave on a plantation in Franklin County, Virginia. I am not quite sure of the exact place or the exact date of my birth, but at any rate I suspect I must have been born somewhere and at some time. As nearly as I have been able to learn, I was born near a crossroads post office called Hale's Ford, and the year was 1858 or 1859. I do not know the month or the day." Even the year is called into question. According to Wikipedia, who sources The Education of Booker T. Washington, American Democracy and the Idea of Race Relations, Booker was actually born in 1856. Who knows the exact date of his birth? Booker's earliest memories are of the plantation and the slave quarters. No other records exist. He used to risk life and death on a weekly trek through the woods. From his earliest memories of childhood, Booker was always occupied with some kind of labor. While mostly used as a gopher and for cleaning the yard, weekly he had to make a dangerous 3-mile trek to the mill house through the woods, delivering corn for it to be grounded. Unfortunately, Booker was too small and frail to carry the corn by himself, so instead he had to rely on horseback. The biggest trouble was when the corn would fall off the horse. Not having the strength to put the corn back on the beast himself, he often had to wait for strangers to come and help him lift it back up. Quoting his biography, "The mill was about 3 miles from the plantation. This work I always dreaded. The heavy bag of corn would be thrown across the back of the horse and the corn divided about evenly on each side. But in some way, almost without exception on these trips, the corn would so shift as to become unbalanced and would fall off the horse, and often I would fall off with it. As I was not strong enough to reload the corn upon the horse, I would have to wait, sometimes for many hours, till a chance passerby came along and would help me out of my trouble. The hours while waiting for someone were usually spent in crying. The time consumed in this way made me late in reaching the mill, and by the time I got my corn ground and reached home it would be far into the night. The road was a lonely one and often led through dense forest. I was always frightened. The woods were said to be full of soldiers who had deserted from the army, and had been told that the first thing a deserter did to a Negro boy when he found him alone was to cut off his ears. Besides, when I was late in getting home, I knew I would always get a severe scolding or a flogging." 3. He believed education was the key to paradise. While it comes to no surprise that young slave children were not allowed access to education, from a very young age Booker was consumed with the drive to get one. Quote, "I had no schooling whatever while I was a slave, though I remember on several occasions I went as far to the schoolhouse door with one of my young mistresses to carry her books." The picture of several dozen boys and girls in a schoolroom engaged in a study made a deep impression upon me, and I had a feeling that to get into the schoolhouse and study in this way would be about the same way as getting into paradise. No doubt this sentiment resonated within him throughout his entire life and career, and can be attributed to why he was such a successful and prominent black leader, educator, and black rights activist. He remembers the day slavery ended. Booker vividly remembers the days leading up to and the eventual moment that freedom came knocking at their doors. Best leaving it up to his own words, I quote, "Finally the war closed, and the day of freedom came. It was a momentous and eventful day to all upon our plantation. We had been expecting it. Freedom was in the air, and had been for months. Deserting soldiers returning to their homes were to be seen every day. Others who had been discharged, and those regiments who had been paroled, were constantly passing near our place. The grapevine telegraph was kept busy night and day. The news and mutterings of great events were swiftly carried from one plantation to another. In the fear of Yankee invasions, the silverware and other valuables were taken from the big house, buried in the woods, and guarded by trusted slaves. Woe be to anyone who would have attempted to disturb the buried treasure. The slaves would give the Yankee soldiers food, drink, clothing, anything but that which had been specifically entrusted to their care and honor. As the great day drew nearer, there was more singing in the slave quarters than usual. It was a bolder, had more ring, and lasted into the night. Most of the verses of the plantation songs had some reference to freedom. True, they had sung those same verses before, but they had been careful to explain that the freedom those songs referred to the next world and had no connection with life in this world. Now they gradually threw off the mask and were not afraid to let it be known that freedom in their songs meant freedom of the body in this world. The night before the eventful day, word was sent to the slave quarters to the effect that something unusual was going to take place at the big house the next morning. There was little, if any, sleep that night. All was excitement and expectancy. Early in the morning, word was sent to all the slaves, old and young, to gather at the house. In company with my mother, brother, sister, and a large number of other slaves, I went to the master's house. All of our master's families were either standing or seated on the veranda of the house, where they could see what was to take place and hear what was said. There was a feeling of deep interest and perhaps sadness on their faces, but not bitterness. As I now recall the impression that was made upon me, they did not at the moment seem to be sad because of the loss of property, but rather because of the parting with those whom they had reared and who were in many ways very close to them. The most distinct thing that I now recall in connection with the scene was that some man who seemed to be a stranger, a United States officer I presume, made a little speech and then read a rather long paper, the Emancipation Proclamation, I think. After the reading, we were told that we were all free and could go when and where we pleased. My mother, who was standing by my side, leaned over and kissed her children, while tears of joy ran down her cheeks. She explained to us what it all meant, that this was the day for which she had been so long praying, but fearing that she would never live to see. 5. He and many other slaves held very little to no ill will against their masters. Contrary to what many would believe, Booker explained that many of his own race harbored no ill will towards whites, even going so far to say that blacks in America benefited from slavery just as much as whites did, again, quoting his own words. From some things that I have said, one may get the idea that some of the slaves did not want freedom. This is not true. I had never seen one who did not want to be free, or one who would return to slavery. I pity from the bottom of my heart any nation or body of people that is so unfortunate as to get entangled in the net of slavery. I have long since ceased to cherish any spirit of bitterness against the Southern white people on account of enslavement of my race. No one section of our country was wholly responsible for its introduction, and besides, it was recognized and protected for years by the general government. Having once got its tentacles fastened into the economic and social life of the Republic, it was no easy matter for the country to relieve itself of the institution. Then, when we rid ourselves of prejudice, or racial feeling, or look facts in the face, we must acknowledge that, notwithstanding the cruelty and moral wrong of slavery, the 10 million Negroes inhabiting this country, who themselves or whose ancestors went through the school of American slavery, are in a stronger and more hopeful condition, materially, intellectually, morally, and religiously, than is true of an equal number of black people in any other portion of the globe. This is so to such the extent that Negroes in this country, who themselves or whose forefathers went through the school of slavery, are constantly returning to Africa as missionaries to enlighten those who remained in the fatherland. This I say not to justify slavery. On the other hand, I condemn it as an institution, as we all know that in America it was established for selfish and financial reasons, not from a missionary motive, but to call attention to a fact, and to show how Providence so often uses men and institutions to accomplish a purpose. When persons ask me in these days how, in the midst of sometimes seem hopelessly and discouraging conditions, I can have such faith in the future of my race in this country, I remind them of the wilderness through which and out of which a good providence has already led us. Ever since I have been old enough to think for myself, I have entertained the idea that, notwithstanding the cruel wrongs inflicted upon us, the black man got nearly as much out of slavery as the white man did. He goes on to explain that through hardships, skills in labor, and the growth of an indomitable spirit, blacks will be able to alleviate themselves from any trouble, because of the experience they went through as slaves. He also further explains that many slaves cared deeply for their masters, even going so far to say that many mourned with them as they lost many loved ones during the Civil War. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the beginning to this series. If you did, please make sure to like, subscribe, and comment down below. Details on where and how to purchase Booker's autobiography will be listed in the description. Please look forward to the next video.